There is a story that has not been told, a truth that has remained hidden for almost 2,000 years, buried under layers of silence and carefully constructed narratives. It is the story of a woman who walked alongside the greatest spiritual leader in history, who witnessed the most crucial moments of the Christian faith, but whose final chapter was deliberately torn out of the book. Have you ever wondered why we know so little about the final destiny of Mary Magdalene? Why does a figure so central to the Gospels, the first witness of the resurrection, simply disappear from the official record? What happened to her after the Ascension? And more importantly, why was her death, her final legacy, treated with so much silence by the Church for centuries? His are not new questions. Millions have felt that the official story is incomplete, a gap that was never adequately filled. And perhaps you, right now, feel that same restlessness. This is not just a quest for historical facts. It's a journey to recover a silenced voice. Before we begin, I want this to be more than just a video. I want it to be a gathering of truth seekers. If you are facing any struggle in your life, any battle or any pain, I invite you to write your prayer request in the comments now. We are a community that believes in the power of prayer, and we will lift you up by name. If you feel this calling to uncover what was hidden, comment with the words, "It's time to remember." Your support is what makes this mission possible. Please, like this video to help this truth reach more people, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single step of this incredible journey. Now, prepare yourself. We are about to travel from 1st century Jerusalem to the shores of France, to piece together the story the world was never meant to hear, the tragic, silent end of Mary Magdalene. To understand why Mary Magdalene's death was shrouded in silence, we must first understand why her life was systematically rewritten. The erasure of her final chapter was not an isolated act. It was the final step in one of history's greatest and most successful character assassinations. So, before we travel to her final resting place, we must first travel back in time to meet the real Mary of Magdalene, woman, described not in later legends, but within the pages of the Gospels themselves. The first, and perhaps most overlooked clue to her identity is her name, Magdalene. This was not a surname. It was a title, meaning Mary of Magdala, and the Magdala of the 1st century was not some sleepy, rustic village. Recent archaeological excavations have unearthed a thriving, sophisticated city. It was a major center for the fishing and boat-building industries, a bustling port on the main trade route between Damascus and Egypt. Archaeologists there have uncovered luxurious villas with mosaic floors, elaborate marketplaces, and, most importantly, a stunning 1st century synagogue, one of the oldest ever discovered in Galilee. Inside that synagogue, they found a stone carved with the earliest depiction of the Jerusalem temple's menorah ever found outside of Jerusalem itself. This tells us that Magdala was a wealthy, cosmopolitan, and devoutly religious town. A woman from Magdala with her own resources was likely educated, connected, and of a significant social standing. This historical context gives new weight to the stunning detail in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8. It lists Mary Magdalene first among a group of prominent women, including Joanna, the wife of Herod's household manager, who supported Jesus' entire ministry out of their own resources. Let's be clear what this means. They weren't just followers, they were patrons. In the Greco-Roman world, patronage was a formal social contract. A wealthy patron provided the financial means for a teacher, a philosopher, or an artist to live and work. In return, the patron received honor and a public association with the movement. For a group of women to be the named patrons of a male rabbi's traveling ministry was a radical and unprecedented reversal of the social order, and Mary Magdalene was listed as the leader among them. She was not a fringe character. She was a foundational pillar of the entire Christian movement. The second part of her identity comes from that same verse. She was a woman from whom 7 demons had been cast out. For centuries, this single phrase has been misinterpreted and weaponized to imply a life of deep moral corruption and sexual sin. But this is a modern, Freudian bias projected onto an ancient text. In the 1st century Jewish worldview, there was little distinction between the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual. ailments that had no visible cause from severe epilepsy to what we might now call bipolar disorder, PTSD, or crippling clinical depression were often understood as the work of malign spirits or demons. The number 7 in Jewish tradition symbolizes totality, completion, perfection. So, to be afflicted with 7 demons did not mean she was 7 times more sinful than anyone else. It meant she was in a state of complete and total suffering, utterly broken by an affliction that dominated every aspect of her life. Her healing, therefore, was not a moral pardon. It was a medical liberation, an act of profound restoration that brought her from the depths of suffering back into the light of life. It is from this place of immense gratitude that her unbreakable, lifelong devotion was forged, and that devotion placed her at the very center of history. All 4 Gospels, in a remarkable display of historical unity, record her presence at the crucifixion. At the moment of Jesus' greatest agony and abandonment, when the male disciples had sworn to die for him, but instead scattered in terror when Peter, the rock, was in the courtyard denying he even knew the man, Mary Magdalene stood firm. She did not flee. She stood at the foot of that bloody cross and bore witness to his final, agonizing breaths. She witnessed his death. She followed his body to the tomb, and on the 3rd day, as the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all attest, she was the first to return at dawn to perform the sacred burial retessa duty of love, typically reserved for the closest female family members. And it was there, alone in the morning light according to John's Gospel, that she became the first human being to witness the single most important event in Christianity. He speaks her name, and in that moment, history is changed. He then gives her a specific command, a formal commission: "Go to my brothers and tell them." This is not a casual instruction. In the ancient world, an apostle was, by definition, one who is sent with a message. In this moment, Jesus makes Mary Magdalene the first true apostle of the New Covenant. The first sermon of the resurrection was not given by Peter or John. It was given by a woman. It is for this reason that the earliest and most respected church fathers, like Hippolytus of Rome and St. Augustine, gave her a title of immense power, a title that has been tragically forgotten by the Western Church: Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles, a wealthy patron, a liberated disciple, a courageous witness, the first apostle of the resurrection. This is the woman the Bible shows us. So where did the image we all know today, the repentant prostitute, come from? The lie has a specific author, a time, and a place. The year is 591 AD. The Roman Empire in the West has collapsed. Europe is ravaged by plague, war, and political chaos. The Church is the only remaining institution of order. Its leader, Pope Gregory the Great, is a powerful and brilliant administrator whose primary goal is to unify and simplify Christian doctrine to bring order to a fractured world. In this context, he delivers a series of sermons on the Gospels. In his now infamous Sermon 33, he performs an act of theological alchemy. With no prior scriptural or traditional basis, he takes 3 separate women from the Gospels, and by the sheer force of his papal authority, declares they are all the same person. He took the anointing from Mary of Bethany, the tears of repentance from the unnamed sinner in Luke 7, and the famous name of Mary of Magdala, and he forged them together. He created a new, composite character, a powerful and simple narrative for an illiterate age: the repentant prostitute. Why? The motive was twofold. First, it created the ultimate symbol of sin and redemption, a powerful teaching tool. But second, and far more strategically, it solved the problem of Mary Magdalene, the powerful, wealthy, female apostle figure who stood as a precedent for female leadership was gone. In her place was a broken, sexualized sinner whose authority came not from her own strength or apostleship, but only from the forgiveness she received from the male leaders of the church. The character assassination was complete. They couldn't remove her from the Bible, so they buried her true identity under a mountain of shame. And by doing so, they created the perfect justification to later ignore her final years, her death, and her true, inconvenient legacy. The silence about her end began with the total distortion of her life. The official story of the apostles ends in blood and glory. Tradition tells us Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. Paul was beheaded outside the city walls. Andrew was crucified in Greece. Thomas martyred in India. The church carefully preserved and celebrated the final, violent testimonies of its male founders. But for the most important female founder, the apostle to the apostles, the official record offers only a void. After delivering her message of the resurrection, Mary Magdalene vanishes from the pages of the New Testament. No official account of her later years, her ministry, or her death was ever preserved by Rome. It is a silence so profound, so absolute, it begs the question, was she forgotten or was she deliberately ignored? History, however, abhors a vacuum. Where the official record falls silent, other, older voices begin to speak. To hear them, we must turn our gaze from Rome, the center of the new empire, to its wilder western shores, to the region of Provence in southern France, where an ancient and powerful tradition has been preserved for nearly 2,000 years, a tradition that claims to tell the rest of Mary Magdalene's story. According to this tradition, which survives in texts like the 13th century Golden Legend, but has roots stretching back to the earliest centuries of Christianity, the story begins in the furnace of persecution. In the years following Jesus' ascension, the Christian community in Jerusalem became a target. Stephen, the first martyr, was stoned to death. James, the brother of John, was executed by the sword. To silence the movement's most powerful witnesses, a group of Jesus' closest companions was arrested. Among them, the tradition names Mary Magdalene, her sister Martha, her brother Lazarus, Mary Salome, and Mary Jacobi. Not wanting to create more martyrs and stir up the populace with public executions, the authorities chose a crueler, quieter fate. They placed the disciples in a rudderless, oarless, sailless boat and cast them adrift into the vastness of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a death sentence by exposure and starvation, an attempt to erase them from history without a trace. The story is meant to sound miraculous, a testament to divine providence, and perhaps it was, but it's also grounded in a harsh historical reality. Exile by sea was a known Roman punishment for political undesirables, and the very currents of the Mediterranean flow in a predictable westward pattern. A drifting boat launched from the coast of Judea would, if it survived the storms, inevitably find its way towards the southern shores of what was then Roman Gaul. Furthermore, Provence was not some unknown barbarian land. It was a thriving, long-established Roman province. The port of Massilia, modern-day Marseille, had been founded by the Greeks 600 years earlier and was a bustling hub of commerce. Established sea routes connected it directly with every major port in the east, including Caesarea in Judea. It is historically certain that refugees from Judea, whether cast adrift or paying for passage on merchant ships, could and did make this journey. There were already established Jewish communities dotted along the southern coast of France. It was a logical destination. The tradition tells us that against all odds, their boat came to rest on the coast of the Camargue, at a place now known as Saintes Maries de la Mer, the Saint Marys of the Sea, named in honor of their miraculous arrival. To this day, the town is a major pilgrimage site. Every year in May, the Romani people of Europe gather there to celebrate their patron saint, Saint Sarah Sarah la Kali, Sarah the Black, who, according to their ancient tradition, was the servant who accompanied the Marys and cared for them on their journey. This is not just a story in a book. It is a living, breathing tradition, celebrated with passion and devotion for over 1,000 years. From this landing point, the tradition says the disciples dispersed to bring their message to the people of Gaul. Lazarus, it is said, became the first bishop of Marseille, martyred for his faith. Martha traveled to the town of Tarascon, where legend says she bravely subdued a fearsome dragon, the Tarasque, not with a sword, but with the power of her faith. But Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles, chose a different path. She did not seek to build a new church or lead a new community. She sought solitude. It is easy for modern skeptics to dismiss all of this as a mere medieval legend, a pious fiction created to give French Christianity a direct, apostolic foundation. But the evidence for the tradition's antiquity is surprisingly strong. The veneration of Mary Magdalene in Provence can be traced back to the very early centuries, long before the great medieval pilgrimage booms. Church fathers like St. John Cassian, writing in the early 5th century, mention her veneration in the region. The cult is ancient, local, and deeply embedded in the identity of the land itself. This raises a crucial question. If the French Church simply wanted to invent a prestigious origin story, why choose Mary Magdalene? Why not Peter, the Prince of the Apostles and Bishop of Rome, or Paul, the great missionary? Why build your foundational myth around a female figure whose identity was already so controversial, so deliberately minimized by the growing power of the Church in Rome? The choice of Mary Magdalene is, paradoxically, a powerful argument for the tradition's authenticity. It suggests this was not a story invented from the top down by authorities to gain political prestige. An invention would have chosen a less problematic, more universally celebrated apostle. The focus on Mary Magdalene suggests the preservation of a genuine, albeit non-Roman, local memory. It was a story that grew from the bottom up, preserved in the hearts of the people, a memory so strong and persistent that the institutional church eventually had to acknowledge and incorporate it, even if it didn't perfectly fit their preferred narrative. It was the memory of a real person, a real arrival, a real presence that left an indelible mark on the land. This journey of exile, this forced passage from the center of the faith to its remote edges, marks the beginning of Mary Magdalene's final and most hidden chapter. It is the story of what a great leader does when the world they knew is gone, when the mission is no longer about public proclamation, but about silent, inner witness. Her tragic end did not begin at her deathbed. It began on this lonely boat, adrift on an unforgiving sea, leaving behind the Holy Land and the world she knew forever. The tradition tells us that while Lazarus engaged in the public ministry of a bishop in Marseille and Martha became the heroine of Tarascon, Mary Magdalene chose a radically different path. She was not seeking a congregation to lead or a city to convert. She had witnessed the ultimate mystery, the resurrection, and now she sought not to explain it, but to absorb it, to live within its profound truth. Her journey took her inland, away from the coastal towns, deep into the wild, rugged landscape of the Sainte-Baume Massif, a place of deep forests, soaring limestone cliffs, and a silence so profound it feels eternal. It was here, according to the ancient tradition, that she found her final home. Not a palace, not a church, but a cave. A damp, cold grotto, nestled high on a cliff face, a natural sanctuary open to the wind and the sky. This place, known today as the Grotto of Sainte-Baume, is where tradition says Mary Magdalene spent the final 30 years of her life. Access to the grotto, even today, requires a steep, arduous climb through a forest that has been revered as sacred for centuries. The cave itself is a vast, natural cathedral of stone. A spring of fresh water weeps from its walls, providing life. The air is cool and still. It is a place utterly removed from the world, a place designed for contemplation. The choice of a grotto is deeply symbolic in spiritual history. It is the womb of the earth, a place of death to the outside world, and rebirth into a deeper reality. The prophet Elijah found God not in the wind or the fire, but in the still, small voice within a cave. The early desert fathers of Egypt, the founders of Christian monasticism, sought enlightenment in the caves of the wilderness. For Mary Magdalene, who had stood before the ultimate sacred Cavithe empty Tomba grotto, would have been the perfect, final sanctuary to contemplate the mystery of death and rebirth she had witnessed firsthand. The legend describes her life here as one of extreme simplicity, a radical asceticism. She lived in solitude, in prayer, in a state of profound, constant communion with the divine. The more mystical versions of the tradition, recorded in the Golden Legend, say that she was fed not by earthly food, but by celestial manna, and that 7 times a day, angels would descend and lift her to the mountain peak to hear the choirs of heaven. These are, of course, mystical images, not literal journalistic reports, but they convey a deep theological truth. They describe a life so completely dedicated to the spiritual realm that the needs of the physical world simply fell away. The 7 times a day is a powerful echo of the 7 demons cast out of her at the beginning of her journey. Her story, which began with a complete healing from total affliction, was now reaching its complete spiritual fulfillment. This was a different kind of apostleship. While Peter was building the institution in Rome, and Paul was traveling the world debating in synagogues, Mary Magdalene was pioneering a different, quieter path. The path of the contemplative, the mystic. Her witness was no longer in public proclamation, but in silent, transformative presence. Her authority came not from an office or a title, but from a direct, unmediated, and continuous experience of the divine. And her death, according to the tradition, was as quiet and profound as her final years of life. After 30 years in the grotto, feeling her end was near, she was miraculously guided down from the mountain to the small oratory in the valley below, where Saint Maximin, one of her original companions from the boat, was celebrating the liturgy. There, surrounded by a celestial light and a heavenly fragrance that filled the small chapel, she received her final communion, and then, peacefully, her long exile over, she died. There was no crowd, no public spectacle, no glorious, violent martyrdom. And this is the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. Think of the stories the Church chose to tell, the legends they elevated. The story of Peter, crucified upside down, a dramatic testament of humility and faith. The story of Paul, the Roman citizen, granted a noble death by beheading. Their deaths were public, violent, and became the foundational legends of the Church of Martyrs. They were stories of power confronting power, of the institution confronting the empire. Mary Magdalene's death was the opposite. It was a story of quiet surrender, of a natural end to a long life of unwavering faith. And this, precisely, is why it was so dangerous to the developing narrative of the Church. A religion built on the glory of martyrdom needs martyrs. A church building a worldly power structure needs stories of conflict, victory, and public sacrifice. A peaceful death in a remote cave offers none of that. It suggests a different, quieter path to holiness that doesn't require the validation of a public execution or the authority of an institutional office. It suggests that the deepest union with God might be found not in a heroic death, but in a quiet, contemplative life. This narrative was a threat. It validated a form of spiritual authority, personal, mystical, contemplative, and embodied by a woman that existed entirely outside the hierarchical, male-dominated structure the Roman Church was meticulously building. So, while the deaths of the male apostles were enshrined in liturgy and legend, the death of the apostle to the apostles was allowed to fade into the obscurity of local French folklore. The silence was not an accident. It was a choice. Her tragic end was not that she died, but that her powerful, peaceful, and alternative story was buried. So, we have reached the end of this journey, a journey through censored history, silenced voices, and a truth that refused to be forgotten. We began with a simple, haunting question: why did the most important woman in early Christianity simply vanish from the story? We discovered that her disappearance from the record began with the assassination of her character. We saw how the powerful public apostle was deliberately transformed into a repentant sinner by Pope Gregory the Great, a strategic move to neutralize a model of female leadership that threatened a rising patriarchal order. We then followed the ancient, whispered traditions to the shores of France, finding a story of exile, not of glory, a story so persistent and unique it rings with the echo of authentic memory. And finally, we journeyed to the Grotto of Saint-Baume, to the heart of her 30 years of silent contemplation, and witnessed a peaceful death, a narrative of quiet, mystical faith, so powerful in its subtlety that it, too, had to be suppressed in favor of the more dramatic, public martyrdoms of the male apostles. The tragedy of Mary Magdalene's end, we can now see, was not in how she died. It was in how her memory was treated. The true tragedy was not the death of her body, but the calculated martyrdom of her legacy. But what does recovering this story mean for us today? Is this an attack on faith, or is it an invitation to deepen it? To recognize Mary Magdalene's full story is not to weaken Christianity, but to enrich it. It restores a powerful, foundational model of female spiritual leadership to the very heart of the faith. It reminds us that there are many paths to holiness, not just the public path of the preacher or the martyr, but the quiet, contemplative path of the mystic. Her story validates the inner journey, the direct experience of the divine that transcends all institutions. Her story is a testament to all those whose voices have been marginalized, whose experiences have been deemed inconvenient by official narratives. It teaches us that truth has a persistent, inexorable quality. It cannot be permanently buried. It may take centuries, it may require the tireless work of countless seekers, but it will always, eventually, find its way back to the light. This journey of discovery does not end here. This is just the beginning. If this investigation has touched you, if it has awakened something in your spirit, we want to hear from you. Leave your prayer request in the comments. This is a community of seekers, and we are here to support one another. If you believe these hidden stories deserve to be told, your engagement is crucial. Like this video to show that this truth matters. Share it with someone who is also asking questions. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the secrets we plan to unveil next go even deeper. Mary Magdalene's true legacy is not in relics or pilgrimage sites, however sacred they may be. It is in the inspiration she offers to all of us who seek truth, who refuse to accept incomplete narratives, and who insist on hearing the voices that were silenced. The truth was not lost, it was simply hidden. And now, it is being brought back into the light.